I think this marks the death knell of Spotify thinking of themselves as a platform.
It's followed up with some quite classic comments. It's definitely worth taking a look at. Link in the description below.
I think you said that incorrectly. I think it's Treblle.
And I'm a reindeer today.
I think we're going to get to the point where saying an AI-related API makes about as much sense as saying a database-related API.
Hey folks, welcome back to the API and Anchor, a special place where we can grab a drink, have a sit and have a little chat about all of the things that have happened in the world of APIs, the toings and froings of the API world, if you will. Back for another episode, a little festive special for this week. And as ever, I'm Martin. I'm joined by Josh.
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, 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 indeed. And I'm a reindeer today.
You're the reindeer man. You're a very good sleigh driver.
Oh, that's excellent.
My joke.
Fantastic. Is that the
hopefully my only joke of the day?
Maybe. We'll see. Still no tankards, but we've brought a little festive cheer with us today, in the form of our headwear. So please do leave a comment below as to whose headwear you think is best. We'll appreciate that. And yeah, let's jump into it. We've got three things that we're going to talk about today. The first is Spotify limiting their API access for third-party developers somewhat quickly. In this case, Spotify have a web API. It's been very popular for a very long time. I remember doing music hack day hackathons as much as nearly 14 years ago at this point.
Oh, wow.
and Spotify having their web API in its early version out in that place. But they have over the past couple of weeks pulled the plug on quite a few of those APIs, much to the annoyance of people who were in mid-development. There wasn't a huge amount of notice given. In fact, hardly any at all, to the point where people were actively developing stuff on top of those APIs and they just stopped working.
Wow.
Not the best approach. So definitely left me thinking whether there was some major reason why they had to do that so quickly without giving any kind of sunset notice. Should be said though that of course all of their partner APIs that offer the similar functionality do still work. So obviously if you're paying to be a part of Spotify's third-party ecosystem, then you're probably fine.
Is it like $50,000 or? No, actually, I've been a user of those APIs. When I worked at Facebook, I worked on a project with Spotify, and we had access to their special granted API. And so there wasn't obviously a monetary exchange going on between Facebook and Spotify at that point, but there was. It was very mutually interesting to both companies. So I guess that's the case. This feels kind of like the Twitter thing, right? Where they sort of shut it down and charged $1 million per call or something for access to the Twitter API.
Yeah.
I'm very curious actually, then, do you remember what you used the Spotify API for?
I mean, a lot of the time it was related artists was one of the things that was pretty popular with a lot of people. And I certainly
What were you building?
Used
what
it
was
for
the
that.
app?
At that point, I was just building kind of anything that came to mind. But I know that we also did a little bit of this, working with this API when I was still at the BBC as well. So we were backing everything that we did at that point with the Music Brains API. So we had a unique ID for every artist, and Spotify was using that as well. So it was a really easy way to be able to say, I have an ID for an artist. Can I get a bunch more information from the Spotify API? And using that Music Brains ID, you could do that. And it was a relatively simplistic call to get, related artists. You would just have that unique ID inside of the URL when you made that RESTful call. Get a bunch of information back about that artist. There was also some analysis stuff that Spotify was very good at, audio analysis, which was part and parcel of a company that they bought years back called the Echo Nest, which provided a lot of kind of machine learning around audio and music that they absorbed into the platform quite a while ago now, I think almost 10 years ago. But that was also a pretty popular API as well. So being able to analyze a piece of audio and then map it to a specific track inside of Spotify, so you could get the ID for that particular track off of, kind of like a Shazam style thing. So there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. You could see why people wanted to use it, but I think that, the inevitability of a lot of these large platforms that do have free APIs to begin with is that at some point, the likelihood is they are going to pull the plug because they've got all they need to get out of the early rise of the ecosystem. People building stuff, people building applications, driving awareness, getting folks to use them, building interesting stuff that drove people ultimately through to the Spotify platform. I guess they just don't feel it's that necessary anymore. They cite security reasons as a major thing for this, but there wasn't really a whole lot of detail as to what that related to, which is understandable. You're not going to say which security things were going to be a problem, but that was the reason for doing it, and potentially the reason why they ended up doing it so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with your speculation. I guess my hunch is they have done some analysis, and the juice isn't worth the squeeze on running this thing for them in an open way, and they're just going to keep it for special privileged partnerships. I guess maybe they're telling the truth about the security vulnerability, and that gave them an excuse to pull it very quickly. And they very quickly decided that, hey, it's not worth even trying to patch this. Clearly, any security vulnerability in that can be fixed. Like, it's not a insurmountable problem. I'm 100% confident of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it for their partners. Or if we want to get really sort of conspiratorial, is they just made up a security vulnerability as an excuse to take it down. Who knows? Who knows? It's interesting, you were talking about sort of the developer advocacy part of it, and how that goes away. And then you compare it to what they're doing with Backstage, right? That their OSS product. I think you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be very much the shift. In fact, I noticed that they've actually put a bunch of job listings out like in the past couple of days that are very focused on doing the Backstage side of things. And for those that don't know, Backstage is a group of products that they developed internally at Spotify that are related to developer portals and developer experience, and they're kind of putting a large effort behind putting that out into the world. So they consider Backstage to be best practice in a number of different ways around developer experience, and they've been building out a team for that. And they've got a bunch of jobs available for it right now. So it's interesting to see that the previous developer relations approach that they had was focused on Spotify's own APIs, and now it's very much focused on building developer experience using their open source technologies for other people.
If I can be so bold, I guess this feels like the motives are very different for those two things. I think this marks the death knell of Spotify thinking of themselves as a platform. And, I think they hoped that if they made these APIs, lots of people would do some really cool, interesting stuff on a sort of hobbyist developer basis that would help grow the Spotify market share, and it hasn't, and so they've killed it. Whereas my gut feel for the reason they like doing the OSS at Backstage has nothing to do with the core Spotify business, but is probably primarily interesting around hiring and being able to attract good talent, because people want to go and work cool places that ship cool software very visibly, like Backstage. So I think the incentive behind Backstage is one of being able to attract talent, whereas I think the goal of the API was probably a little bit more aligned with the core business and promoting of Spotify, and it just didn't deliver the punch that they hoped for. Obviously, having partners does. Like I have an amp that has Spotify Connect in it, and Alexa I use with Spotify all the time, and so on, which is all driven by APIs, of course. But interesting move by them, and especially the way they did it was pretty brutal. I think Adrian wrote a nice article on. We should put the link to it on how to deprecate an API. This is like the how not to do it if you want to keep friends and and influence people.
If you want to experience some of the developer rage, you can head to the Spotify Community Developer Forum and read some of the responses to the article that they put up there. The very brief note saying we're pulling the plug on this is followed up with some quite classic comments. It's definitely worth taking a look at. Link in the description below.
I haven't seen that yet. You'll have to secretly send me some of your favorites, because I'm assuming they're not kind enough to read out here.
Yeah, there's gold in there.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the decorations in the pub today, by the way. I think I'm feeling very festive in here today.
It is. It's wonderful. It's so warm and welcoming as well. It's a real pleasure.
Fire roaring in the corner over there.
To be in here. And you can't see them, of course, but we do have a selection of fine-looking dogs sleeping at our feet as well. Always love a pub that's got good dogs in it.
100%. Cheers again.
Yeah, cheers to the non-existent tankards.
We'll work on that.
It's a 2025 thing at this point.
So what's next? What else is happening as we wind down 2024?
So to finish drinking that. So Treblle have just put out their anatomy of an API report for 2024. which offers some
I
interesting.
think you said that incorrectly. I think it's Treblle. Treblle? Treblle. No, I did meet the founder the other day, and he said it was Treblle, which
It is Treblle.
I shouldn't make fun of the name, but it's so hard. I don't know how to say it.
I've noticed that in the notes, it doesn't like the way that it's spelt. Sorry, Treblle. It's 2 L's, 1 B. For those that need to know, or those that need to put it into Google. The reports come out and some interesting insights from there. It's worth saying though that they've taken this data from their own experience, so stuff that's happening on their platform. From what I can tell, so a little bit skewed towards obviously their user base, but there were a few interesting takeaways that come from this. I think that are worth talking about. Average number of endpoints per API grew almost double in 2024, from 22 endpoints to 42.
That's interesting. Although I gotta question the data set here a little bit. This is their customers, and whilst they're great, and I'm sure they're doing very well, they're not exactly ubiquitous right now, like say Postman. And so I question a little bit: is that maybe the change in their customers? Are they taking on more enterprise customers? So to say that statement in isolation without context, do I really think the average number of endpoints in all APIs doubled in 1 year? I don't buy it, to be honest. I think it did for them based on what they saw, but I don't think that equals a universal truth.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I don't know for sure. It's just conjecture.
Well, if you like that one, then here's one that may definitely get you. AI-related APIs experienced an 807% growth in 2024. So far outpacing, they say, the 10% average growth across other industries. Again, that they know about.
If anything, that number seems low, right? Because you went from zero almost to, it should be infinite growth, probably. Like what we've seen a lot of AI folks come and use Zuplo this year. So we've had near infinite growth, I would say. There's a bit of a question of like, what does AI related mean today? Is it I guess it doesn't mean LLMs. It doesn't mean an actual LLM API. I think it means an app that's built using LLMs or built using models. And there's lots of people doing specialization, like Greenlight AI and startups like this doing like legal and so on. I guess that's what it means, I think.
I assume so. I think AI related APIs is just anything that is AI technology with an API, all of a sudden coming through, right? Which could be loads of things. It could well be even products that already existed that have flipped into that space and have added an API, or just were not necessarily AI first previously that are now reimagining themselves in 2024 and increasing that significantly.
This doesn't seem surprising to me. It sounds quite real. I think we're going to get to the point where saying an AI-related API makes about as much sense as saying a database-related API. That is going to become ubiquitous, to repeat that word. And it's going to be in everything. And hence, seeing exceptional growth there is not surprising. The other thing we're sort of seeing a lot of discussion about on the AI-related front is the sort of the consumption side. So like how people are using gateways. And I don't know if Treblle would see much of this in their reports of what they do, but how people are using gateways to sort of manage interactions with LLMs. And then I'm having discussions with folks asking about the idea of sort of agentic API management. So, if you imagine the enterprise, people are going to be building agents. That's what we're going to do now. We're going to build agents that go and do work for us. And you're going to want to unleash them on your SaaS APIs, right? But not on Spotify because they shut that down. So boo. You're going to want to unleash those agents onto like Salesforce and Workday and blah, 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 blah. And then you're going to do that without any kind of governance. You're just going to let this thing go loose. So you're going to give it the API keys directly. So it's very, especially for companies like us that do gateway stuff, really interesting sort of evolution to watch what's going on. And, I think we mentioned this last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about Kong's raise and how that was varied, tied with AI and the idea that APIs are how AI gets work done, and that being an opportunity in the governance space. So, interesting. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff in the report. I think it's definitely well worth read. Take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, I would say. One of the other aspects that they mentioned is how JavaScript APIs are definitely not as secure from a
What's
governance
that
point
all
of view.
about? I mean, like, what is that? What is that little kick into the JavaScript community? What do you think is going on there?
I think that there's an element of user base to a degree. I think that there's a lot more lean towards JavaScript frameworks being used for people who are just getting started and doing things, following along with the way that a framework says things should be done. Building a set of routes inside of an application and putting them out somewhere and going, okay, well, I can get my data in now and I can get my data out now. Cool, right? But then not necessarily going up and following up with the security best practices, rate limiting, all of the other things that you would necessarily expect in there as well. Because on their top performers were, frameworks like Laravel and languages like Go and PHP. It was only.
Do we think that's a function of the framework?
There could be
that's driving the pattern, or the people using it.
There could be an element that some aspects of working with those particular frameworks are less secure by default, more secure by default, and the practices around designing and developing APIs in some of them just lean more towards more security best practices, more best practices in general, because there's a tighter approach to doing that. I mean, especially in Go. You are quite tightly scoped. You've definitely got a lot of structure and typing behind what it is that you would do, which you don't necessarily have in some JavaScript frameworks, unless you're using TypeScript to add that additional extra layer on top of it. So interesting to see, but very, very much top of the list, not much JavaScript. Bottom of the list, very much JavaScript. Only Adonis.js stood out in the scoring well above those other JavaScript frameworks. So whatever Adonis is doing, they're doing it very well. Maybe the other frameworks need to take a lesson from their book.
Fair enough.
All right, so our final thing for today, an interesting one here, because it's always nice to see, I think, a little bit of productization coming out of something that is quite general. And in the world of AI and companies putting out models, almost on the daily at the moment, it was interesting to see Mistral release a content moderation API, which is a product in itself that is backed by their own models for handling content moderation, which is relatively large business these days, and there are definitely companies out there that have APIs for this, but those companies do charge money for it. There is a huge amount of scale behind this, and Mistral have gone and put this out and you can use it for free to get started, which looking at their kind of overall approach to go to market in general, free by default seems to be the approach that they're taking right now. They've got Le Chat, which they put out, which is their chat interface for their larger models, which is available for free. As long as you have an account, you can use it, which is pretty cool. And now, if you want to do content moderation, then potentially you could adopt Mistral's new API for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an obvious use case, isn't it? And such a powerful one when you think about, look at the scale of Facebook and the content moderation teams they used to have. And whilst I worked there, I had no direct experience of this, but, there were a lot of stories around people sort of having traumatic experiences moderating content on Facebook. So this is kind of really interesting. I think, it's much more scalable than people. It's safer than using people, with some checks and balances, of course, if it's good at what it's doing. And if you just think about this, is like a real problem with Web 2.0, Web 2.0, and the idea of people contributing to the internet is it's just so hard to know what is going on your platform. With AI, that gets much easier now. Probably expensive right now, but let's assume the prices keep coming down. So yeah, it seems like a really fantastic idea to go and do something very special in this area. I assume, the fact it's backed by, these folks backed by NVIDIA and Microsoft, I think they see a big sub-market in this opportunity. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting to see them productize around it, which is definitely, I'm going to be looking closely at this over the next year to see if there's anything else to come, or whether this is unique. But thinking about the Spotify story that we started with, though, it's free now, but is that always going to be the case at the moment? It's like, it's great from a go-to-market point of view, but will the financials continue to stack up later down the line, or will it be just is this the route to adoption, and making it an easier choice, I guess, to adopt against other platforms that exist that do this, but maybe other companies that have models that could also do this as well, is making it, completely free to get started. The move to get that adoption, especially in the European market, which is definitely where Mistral seem to try to play the game against the other competitors in the space.
Yeah, I guess for the free thing to work out, there's got to be enough free users upgrade into serious paid accounts or serious business drivers, which clearly just probably didn't happen with Spotify. This is interesting. If I was thinking of starting a Twitter rival today, or Blue Sky or whatever folks are using, one of the hardest problems I'm going to be sort of raising capital for is content moderation. Like you have to, it's just, I think in the EU it's going to be, it's going to be a lot of sort of oversight coming there. And so the idea now, much like it was easier to buy servers, when AWS did its thing, and that sort of created a lot of opportunity for startups. I think this is a big deal for anyone that is building a content platform for the next Reddit, because needing the scale of humans to do that it just doesn't work. Whereas this seems much more scalable. So I think it's really interesting. I hope it drives a whole bunch of innovation on the content space and makes the internet a safer place. You can imagine apps for parents and so on that are using sort of content moderation here. So I have a much better idea of what my kids are watching and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I give the chance of this having a free option higher than, and keeping it higher than Spotify's were. But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. You're effectively lowering the barrier to entry to having content moderation as part of your application, right? If it felt out of reach before, then maybe it really isn't at this point. So if you have, the chops and the time, then, there's now something out there that can help you get started with using it and, bring moderation by default into something that you're developing, which is maybe something that hasn't existed up to this point.
It's an insight into some of the stuff we're probably going to see here is specialization of models where there is a significant sort of human contingent that it can, replace. Sorry, humans. I think we're kind of seeing that in the customer service sector, right? You probably heard the story about Klarna and how they essentially just used LLMs to replace a significant chunk of the operational workforce on customer support, saving tons and tons of money. I'm not sure if anyone's released a specific customer service LLM, but I think we'll keep seeing more of these. Investors go and love it. It's going to be a lot of startups doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, training up the LLM in specific niches and then productizing with an API, is a very, especially when you put it out for free, is a relatively quick way of proving product market fit around the basis of the models itself as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what else they come up with. But speaking of moderation, Josh, we do have to finish up our drinks. The bell is being rung here at the API and Anchor. My antlers are going on the wonk already, and it's probably time to fix them up before I head out into the street. But thank you very much for your insights as ever, Josh. Always good to spend some time here in the API and Anchor. Ho 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 to you, and ho ho to you, the people that have watched this over the past few weeks. Thanks very much for joining us here at the API and Anchor. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you in 2024. We look forward to joining you again for the very first episode of 2025, when we hope there'll be yet more wonderful things to talk about from the toings and froings of the world of APIs. If you want to know about that, then please do subscribe to the channel. If you have any thoughts or opinions on any of the things that we talked about today, please do drop a comment down below. Don't forget to give this video a like, and if you want to know when the next API and Anchor drops, then do hit the bell so you get notified about that as well. Thank you very much for joining us here. We'll see you in 2025.
We should call it the Last Orders Bell. And also, I'd be really curious if people have things they want us to talk about. So if anybody has a particular topic they want us to drop a comment.
Absolutely. We'll talk about anything in moderation.
We're going to use Mistral's AI to make sure we keep it on the straight and narrow.
Well, we can do. It's available. Let's go.